Hello everyone, this is Thyrank from the DAZ message boards. As promised and requested, I am doing a light tutorial on the lighting techniques that I use in some of my scenes. This tutorial is going to be using DAZ Studio 3 Advanced, along which you can use DAZ Studio Standard Edition, as long as you have the Uberenvironment light shader. That is going to be an integral piece of this tutorial. This tutorial is not going to be anything super technical or a proper lighting tutorial. This technique is something that kind of goes outside most of the tutorials I've read, but I've gotten a lot of comments and compliments on the lighting that I'm using in the images that I've been posting, and I feel it's only right to share it. This is a very easy light setup to achieve pretty great render results. They will not be by any means perfect, but it's an easy way to get you on the right path to creating absolutely great renders. So let's get started. I've loaded up a scene in DAZ Studio. I haven't rendered this with lights yet, so I don't know how it's going to turn out. But basically all we have is a camera, Michael 4, a background, and some textures on Michael 4, which would be the buddy textures and morph from Mech 4D. Also, just for the sake of decency, I've thrown a pair of pants on him, although it won't play any part in this tutorial. Okay, so it's basically pretty basic scene setup. We're going to be doing a portrait shot of Michael 4. This technique is best applied, I should say, on portrait renders. It can work for other scenes as well, but it may need some adjustments and tweaking. But let's switch to our camera view. So this is the frame. We're rendering at 768 by 1024. So for a portrait shot, obviously you're going to want, generally speaking, a longer height than you have width. So we're rendering 768 by 1024. Little quick note about the camera. If we switch out here, the default camera is set to 125 focal length. Some people recommend 180 for DAZ Studio. I find that personally a little too much, but to each their own. Whatever works for you. I usually go with 125. We also have depth of field turned on, and I usually like to set that at about the eye. So you see your focal point right here, which is pretty much at his eye. It's a pretty narrow depth of field, which works. I think it works pretty good for portrait renders, as you get your character's face in focus, and as you go further back, they start to come out of focus, which I think gives a nice effect to portrait renders. So we have Buddy, which is not much of a pose, but it works for our for what we're going to be doing. It looks fine in the camera. That's all that really matters. So I haven't lit this yet. I haven't done anything with the lighting. I just set up the scene and hit render to see what we got so far, and here it is. So this is the unlit scene. So I'm just going to walk you through what I do for lights, and you're going to be absolutely amazed at how easy this is. So basically, for portrait renders, I use two lights. Let me get out of here because I'm kind of spoiling which one of them I use, eh? First of which is a spotlight, which we just create and put that in the scene. His eyes are glowing because I have reflection maps put on them. So we switched from our default camera to the spotlight view. We're going to zoom that out a little bit, and we're going to raise it up to about neck level, generally, for me. I'm going to bring it off to the right. Before, I should slow down a little bit before I do that. If we just position that on him and come back to the camera. Generally speaking, I usually follow where the character is facing to place the light, which in this instance would be to the left of our camera. Probably about 90-95% of the time I will follow that rule. This is going to be one of those instances where I break it, because it's not really a rule, it's more of a guideline. It depends on what you want to catch in your image. This spotlight is actually going to be turned to specular only. We're not going to be using this for light. Uberenvironment will provide our light, but as that won't pick up the specularity, we're going to put in a specular spotlight. Now, like I said, generally I usually go to the area that the character is facing. In this case would be the left, but if I went from the left, it would pretty much have to face him directly, as his head is facing the same rough direction as his body. So you'd kind of get not so great results. It'd look a little more dull if your spotlight was facing him almost directly. Like if we went over here. Actually, I'm going to do this for this tutorial just to see how well it works, as we do get a decent angle. I was going to set it up to the other side, but let's try it from this one and see what happens. This might work from here. So, general rule is whatever way your character is facing. In this case, it would be to the left of the camera. So we set up our spotlight to the left. For this one, I'm itching to do it to the right, but let's do it from the left and see what we get. Basically, it's not a rule. It's whatever you want to catch in your specularity. So if we switch that to specular only, you'll catch the specularity on his chest, his neck, and some on his face. That is probably going to work. There's a little bit on his arm as well. So basically, the parts that are shining a little bit are what you're going to catch in your specularity. So we're going to switch that back to on so we can see what we're doing. The other thing about those lights, the spotlights, I usually, let me just switch to the top view and zoom out. Usually want to put your lights in at an angle to your camera. I usually try to go around 45 degrees, but it depends on the scene and what you're trying to accomplish. Like, we have our camera that's facing almost straight ahead, and if we come from where the light is, you follow that up and you get a nice angle to your camera. If you were to position this spotlight pretty much behind your camera, facing him, you're not going to get a whole lot of interesting results. It'll look a little flat and dull. So we switch back to our default camera. We're going to turn this to specular only, and we're going to go into, in mine it's in DAZ built-in content. I've been told it's also in Studio 3 shaders, I believe. But wherever your Uberenvironment lives, Uberenvironment 2, just double click it and load it up. And then we're going to go to our Scene tab, select Uberenvironment 2, come back to your Content tab, scroll to the bottom of this menu here, and apply the high quality preset. And literally, that's it. That's, well, almost. That's what I do for most of the renders that I've gotten comments and compliments and everything on. That's usually what I do. The spotlight, you'll notice, let me just go to the Scene tab and select that. I had the shadows left off. If we turn the shadows on a specular spotlight, you're pretty much going to lose your shadows anyway. You might get some detail, but it's really not worth the render time that you're going to increase, which isn't going to be too bad with Buddy anyway, as he doesn't have actual hair per se. About the light, usually the light, or the color I should say, I will leave at the same as, roughly the same as what the actual light in the scene is. So in this case, Uberenvironment is set at 255, 255, 255, white. So our spotlight is the same. If I wanted to give this a little more of a sky kind of feel, and, oops, take the red out, tint it a little bit blue, you'd kind of want to do the same with your specular light and tint it a little blue as well. And I mean the same works if you wanted to make your light yellow. You know, put some yellow in your specular light as well. That way it'll look a little bit more believable. For now, we'll just undo that. We're going to leave these at 255, 255, 255. The only other thing I do is with Uberenvironment, I usually lower the intensity a little bit. Uberenvironment at 100% tends to kind of overexpose on the lighting. and you end up with good results, but if it was toned down a little bit, your character comes through a little more. So we're going to drop that down to, I usually find about 80% works. Somewhere around there. So right now we're at 80.3. So we have an Uberenvironment providing the light and a specular spotlight for the specularity. That's it, literally. So we're going to hit render.